But that brings us to, I just mentioned, there were some games this year where the Buffalo Bills struggled to score. We have a new offensive coordinator in Ken Dorsey. So the next thing I want to sort of chit chat a little bit about here is maybe some changes that we're seeing to the offensive scheme through the first 2 days of training camp. I thought there was a lot of good nuggets from the guys on hand at training camp. I have in my notes here, Ken Dorsey keeping his distance while coaching the plays, trying to sort of mimic and get comfortable calling the plays in game-like scenarios. That stood out to me as something that I read. Day one, it was heavy 11 and 12 personnel, 3 wide receiver, 1 tight end, and then 2 tight end, 2 wide receiver. So it's seemingly like maybe those could be the 2 dominant personnel groupings this season. But then today on day 2, a lot of spread formation, a lot of 5 receiver stuff. My expectation is that might be more 2-minute drill, hurry up stuff, but it was still interesting to see the transition from 11 and 12 on day 1 to that spread stuff on day 2. A lot of pre-snap motion was mentioned by guys like Greg and Aaron and Eric, where, they're in the I formation with guys like Motor, Gilliam, Knox, Howard, and Diggs. But next thing you know, you're spread out 5 wide. Yesterday, you saw the same thing with Cook, Gilliam, Knox, Howard, and Davis. You're bunched up in that I formation, but next thing you know, you're spread out 5 wide. It forces the opposing defense to come at you in their base formation, and then you spread them out and you create those mismatches. And if they try to play nickel, you try to run the ball down their throat. So maybe a little bit different from the Buffalo Bills because of some of these offensive weapons they have. How much should we be reading into the first 2 days and how the Bills are using all these different formations?
Well, I mean, you like that you're seeing variety only across just 2 days so far, right? I think that's going to be a good forecast or precursor to what you're going to see throughout the rest of camp. And I also think it's maybe a little bit of experimentation, right? Like what seems to be working well early in camp, maybe does Ken Dorsey kind of start narrowing the focus as camp goes on to kind of what he feels is working best for his personnel. So I also think it's a little bit of Ken Dorsey assessing his personnel, especially the new personnel, and the 2 guys you mentioned specifically were Cook and Howard, and how those guys are going to fit in. And I think that, that point about bunching them up and spreading them out, I think guys like OJ Howard and James Cook could be the 2 biggest beneficiaries of schematics like that. Early in camp, you're trying to see if that kind of meshes well, or if you think that's going to work well. And then if that does, then maybe you kind of put some packages in like that for those guys or for those formations as camp wears on. But I think early on, experimentation is not a bad thing. And I'm not saying that as in none of this stuff is actually going to come to fruition. I just think it's a little bit of, let's try some different things and let's see what works well with the personnel we have. So a little bit of expanding the schematics, but also assessing the personnel at the same time, which the 2 go hand in hand, obviously. So I like the trend so far through two days.
Randy Hartman coming in, he's saying, I think ultimately Dorsey will be a better offensive coordinator than Dable. I was hesitant, right, to make a statement like that earlier on this offseason because, I have a lot of respect for Brian Dable and what he's done, and I know Randy does too. And I didn't want to put too much pressure on a new offensive coordinator, but through 2 days of camp, and again, this is through 2 days of camp, really excited about what I'm seeing. Guys like Stephen Burns coming in saying they talked about Texas routes and, fade routes for guys like James Cook. James Cook was being used all over the field as a receiver, starting out in a pony backfield with Devin Singletary, and then flexing out and being used as a slot wide receiver. Versatility and playmakers, getting the ball in the hands of these skill position players seems to be a focus through the first 2 days of training camp. Hot routes, mismatches. We saw them implementing some screens as well. Josh Allen stated, look, Brandon Beane's going to have some tough calls come the 53-man cutdown day because there are a lot of playmakers on this offense. Josh, during his press conference, yards after catch is a quarterback stat. He took some onus upon himself. Most people would say it's not a quarterback stat. Josh Allen, being the guy who he is, took that onus and said, no, it's on me. It's my job to sort of fix this and, take some of the pressure off myself in this offense. And there was a great quote from Eric Turner that I want to read here about the yards after the catch and getting the hands into some of these versatile playmakers. Eric tweeted from the Cover One account, It seems like the offense has made a concerted effort to improve the quick game, specifically 1 3-step slants and under routes. Saw a lot of those routes the first 2 practices. Get the ball out quickly and in the hands of your playmakers. Even if we don't run the ball more in 2022, even if we don't run the ball more efficiently in 2022, it seems like one of the ways, if those 2 things don't work, and hopefully they do, in taking the pressure off of Josh Allen, is not making him have to sit back in the pocket, roll out of the pocket, and make a lot of those plays that he makes down the field. Take some of the pressure off him, let him just dump the ball off to these playmakers and let them do the work.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of a little bit reminds me of the old Chan Gailey offense in a way. Some of that quick passing game we saw with Fitzpatrick and Fred Jackson and CJ Spiller back in the day. Now, I know it's going to be a little bit different than that, but those arrow routes, those Texas routes for the backside of the backfield. I mean, James Cook, that's something that's in his wheelhouse, right? Those arrow routes coming out of the backfield and getting him matched up with linebackers, getting the ball out of Josh's hands quickly. And I mean, you hear this from analysts all the time when you're watching games on Sundays. Like, they talk about the short passing game being just an extension of the running game. And, that topic maybe gets overblown a bit, but there's some truth. There's truth to that, right? And getting the ball out quickly and getting not putting your quarterback in harm's way. We saw, I mean, years ago, Eli Manning Giants did that to the Bills to death in one of those games back in Orchard Park. Like, they just literally would snap the ball to him and he'd get rid of it. And like, the Bills had no chance to get to him. And it reduces the chances of him getting sacked, right? So you take him out of harm's way, you get the ball in the playmaker's hands, get him quickly. Like, you have personnel now for that with guys like James Cook, Shakir, we're going to talk about, OJ Howard, maybe even Jamison Crowder, who was absent, but it seems to be a good fit for who they have, right? And Stephon Diggs is another guy who can thrive in those types of situations as well. So I found it interesting that Josh I shouldn't say I found it interesting. I'm not surprised he took responsibility of the Yak being a quarterback stat, because that's just the kind of guy he is. But I think that people are going to automatically assume, because he said that it is, but it is still a lot about scheme and route concepts as well. He was just being the franchise leader that he is and taking that on himself.
Randy Harmon with a great comment. Added benefit of the quick hitter approach is a decreased risk of injury and a decrease in the amount of turnover worthy plays, which I think is a really good point as well. I was actually reading Randy's comment when you were talking. When you talked about the quick hitters, did you say the Eli Manning game against the Giants?
Yeah.
I thought I heard that out of the corner of my ear because I was reading Randy's comment.
It was years ago, but it was like, it was super annoying.
That game haunts my dreams. I still think about it to this day. I shouldn't say that. I don't think I've ever been more angered at like a meaningless football game. Not that it was meaningless, because I think it was still early in the season, but that's when the Bills,
fairly early.
You didn't have the expectations for those teams that you have for these teams now. I was like never more infuriated or frustrated during a football game than I was that day.
That was so frustrating.
Like, I was just so like, wasn't that the Jim Schwartz year where we were just getting sacks galore? But that day, like, Eli Manning was not having it, and our defensive line could not get that game. Just makes me, I still think about that game and it still makes me angry. Hall of Famer Eli Manning. Ken Dorsey signed the picture I have of him of Sports Illustrated cover at Miami University. Really nice guy, says Pops Mafia. That's super cool. One of my favorite parts of Bills Embedded that aired last week, that dropped about OTAs, was just seeing on the practice field Ken Dorsey and Josh Allen interact. Brian Daboll always had that like really great relationship with the players, and he would joke around with them and he would chuckle with them, and like he would have a good time with them while still keeping it professional. And I always saw like Ken Dorsey as this very like stoic, quiet figure. But seeing that Bills Embedded, hearing Ken Dorsey mic'd up, that's not who Ken Dorsey is. So that was a lot of fun seeing that from Ken Dorsey.